Hello, welcome to the next or the most recent webinar Q&A with Dr. Charlie Hill-Butler here. So hopefully you've had a nice opportunity to watch her video, her webinar on remote sensing and Earth observations. And we've had a few questions come in, so we're going to have a bit of a chat. Half an hour, a little bit late. I do apologise. A few technical glitches in the system have made us a couple of minutes late starting, so I do apologise about that. But I suppose firstly, I'll pass over to Charlie to kind of introduce herself. She did a fantastic job introducing herself at the start of the video, but as soon as you're here, you're better suited than me, Charlie.
Thanks, Craig. So I am a lecturer in the geography department. My research and my teaching really focuses around remote sensing, GIS and natural hazards. So for my undergraduate degree and then into my postgraduate degrees in research, they all focused around the uses of mostly satellite information and how we can use that to improve our understanding and also kind of modelling of natural hazards. So for me particularly, I have a keen fondness for earthquakes and volcanoes, but my teaching and more recently kind of my generalised research is around their uses for natural hazards. So within that, I teach across the GIS and the remote sensing modules at Coventry, as well as some of our natural hazards and physical geography modules. And I'm also the course director for the geography and the hazards degree as well. So I kind of cover all bases, but it's more of a technology focus rather than necessarily being on the ground, which obviously at the moment with COVID is perfect because it's not meant that I've missed out on any field work, but I do like getting out into the field and going to explore and see different volcanoes when I can as well.
I suppose, and it's kind of similar to what I've done as well, you know. Unfortunately, what both of us do looking at hazards, we can't typically go to a hazard exactly to collect that data. So it's about trying to use different methods, isn't it, really, to kind of understand process. Yeah,
definitely. And I think particularly with Earth observation or remote sensing, so satellite data, it allows you to do a lot more because, you know, when, like if me and Craig were to go out in the field, for example, you would only be able to go out for a certain amount of time, whether that's a week or a month, and collect that data. Whereas with a satellite, it's passing over every day or every few days, and we can collect that information for however long that satellite is orbiting our Earth and passing over that location on our Earth's surface. So we are seeing a change in that, really, aren't we, Craig, in terms of, I think we're seeing a change really now to the fact we've got so much data that we need to process it more quickly, shall we say, but also more fluidly as well, so more routinely. So we're having so much data that now it's kind of like we have more data than we have time.
Yeah, I think you said in one of your in the presentation, you were on about how much data is collected a day, and you said, was it I can't remember the
petabytes now. So yeah, so we've got so many satellites that are now orbiting our Earth. We even had a satellite that was launched in September this year. So there's a series called Landsat, and we've had Landsat being launched by the United States Geological Survey now for over 40 years. So we've got 40 years worth of data, but their most recent satellite, Landsat 9 it's called, was launched in September. So not only are we having more and more data coming in, but we're having more and more satellites launched. So we're into the petabytes, 10 plus petabytes a day now of data. And considering I think my laptop's about 500 gigabytes in terms of memory size. So even in one day of worth of data, I would not be able to save the amount of data that we're collecting just on my laptop alone.
It's amazing, really, when you consider the volumes. That leads really nicely, actually, to one of the first questions we've had come in. So thank you very much. I should say, obviously, the slides are here, so anyone watching this live can send these over. The Menti actually will last for a few days after this. I'll upload this onto YouTube, and it'll be messaged out on our social media platforms, so you can send it over. But obviously, Charlie, your email address is on the slide. That is correct. I hope I put it. It is. We've got the university official one, the A one, but I find that less confusing. So obviously, you can send Charlie an email. I'm sure she won't mind, or myself. Why not? Is on the older slides if you want, and I can pass on emails as well. So if you've got any other questions, but really, yeah, the first one that's come in is actually about. So you mentioned obviously the new Landsat satellite, but you also in your talk you said that there is a satellite that covers the surface or the same point kind of 4 times a day. Is that the Landsat one you're talking about, or is that a different satellite? And also as a follow-on to that, the person asked about, can anyone access that data, or is it cost kind of what's how do we get access to it?
So there are lots of different ways we can begin to access data. The one that covers our Earth surface 4 times a day, that's called MODIS. And again, that's managed by the United States Geological Survey, so the USGS. So what happens is we have 2 satellites that are orbiting our Earth, but both of those satellites have got what we call the same sensor on them. So effectively the same camera that is launched on them. They've been calibrated, so they're collecting the same information. And they have both of the satellites pass over the Earth twice a day, one at night and one in the day. And that results in 4 lots of data that is collected for us. Now, the resolution of those data it's a little bit what we call coarser or lower resolution. So we're looking at about what we have in terms of what we can see on the ground is about 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre. So it's not as good as the Landsat I've mentioned, which is 30 metres, so 30 by 30 metres. But it allows us to get that data quite frequently. So, for example, in my PhD, I used MODIS, and we collected it 4 times a day. I had 12 years of data for 100 volcanoes, so you can imagine how much data I had. But I focused on the nighttime data because I didn't want the heat from the sun heating up the Earth and affecting the measurements of volcanoes that I was looking at. But all of this data is freely available. So we have 2 kind of I would say bodies that we can begin to get data now from for free, and that is the USGS. And the USGS have a platform I tend to use. They have multiple platforms, but the one I tend to use is called Earth Explorer. You have to register for an account. Say, for example, you're doing it for a bit of coursework for school or for university, or you want to do it for a bit of research. You can sign up to an account for free, and you just tell them why you're going to use that data, and then you can download that data. The other platform that I haven't really mentioned in this talk today is available through the European Space Agency. And the European Space Agency, they don't have as long a period of data collection as what the USGS do, but we do get a lot of data from them. And they started launching what they call their new Sentinel series of data from 2014 onwards. And we're now up to Sentinel 5, but each of those sensors have got, again, 2 sensors. And again, if you go on to the European Space Agency Sentinel Data Hub, you can register for your account and you can download that information for free. What comes after that, obviously, is the need to do something with that data. It's all well and good having an image, but you need to do something. And again, there are platforms out there. There are ones that have got a license associated with them, and you have to pay for them. If you just wanted to have a play around to get yourself started, there is something called QGIS, and you can download that freely available. You can install it onto Windows, onto Mac computers, and you can basically import that data, that satellite data, into that software and begin to play around with it. And the nice thing about QGIS as well is the fact that there is so much online help and support that you can really get yourself started. So you can go and Google tutorials or workshops, and there's lots of different workshops, tutorials that will talk you through actually kind of processing some of the satellite data or doing something with that data. So in my talk, when we were talking about kind of how we can assess natural disasters, one of the examples I had is how the land use changes before and after a hazard event. Now we can map that using our satellite imagery, but we do something called image classification with that. And what we say is, okay, this portion of land is an urban area, this portion of land is green, it's a forest, this portion of land is water. And what we could do is have an image from before the event, before a natural disaster, after a natural disaster. And then we can say, okay, can we pick out any areas that are damaged? So once that was an urban environment, for example, is it not an urban environment anymore? And as an example for that, QGIS has got what we call a plugin. It's got a tool that you can install on it for free again. And online, there is a tutorial basically talks you through how you can process that data to do image classification. So there's really loads of resources out there to get you started if you wanted to and if you were keen to. What I would say, and I think Craig would agree with me on this, is the more you practice, the more confident you become. It's kind of like driving a car. So, you know, you're not going to get more confident driving your car unless you practice. And it's the same with technology or GIS. The more time you just spend playing around with the software, clicking different buttons, seeing what happens, that's how you become more confident, particularly in using the software, but not being scared of it either, which is key.
I think that, I'll absolutely echo that. And I think that's a really good point, particularly, you know, getting people to use it. I think, you know, what we all wanted to get out of these is these whole webinars is all about an educational tool. And I actually think this is a great thing, particularly with NEAs. You know, the NEAs that students get, you know, that can do using such software. So they've got some of these skills before they come to university. We're not expecting, you know, GI specialists, geographical information specialists. That's not what we're expecting. I don't think many universities or any university would expect that. But, you know, having that exposure to the software, I think, is a great thing. And I've certainly seen on Twitter a number of people, particularly with over the pandemic, you know, some of the field skills that we've unfortunately not been able to do quite so much. It has given us opportunities, though, to delve more into some of the more Earth observation-based stuff. And I think QGIS is such a fantastic open source tool. Like, as Charlie says, you can all kind of get hold of. And it is a bit daunting to begin with, but it's a fantastic way to kind of play around with maps, essentially. And that's really what we love doing as geographers. So there's
another one actually that started, well, it's not started, I found it a couple of weeks ago, but it's to get you started, and it's called the Sentinel Playground. So European Space Agency, and they've got a portion of their website called the Sentinel Playground. And basically it's the satellite imagery that they're collecting, so that Sentinel data we've just talked about, and you can view that imagery for any place across the world. You can zoom in for your area of interest, but then you can view different properties, shall we say, of the imagery. So we have something called false colour composites, and they're a little bit psychedelic, they're a little bit fun to look at, but basically we collect information in different bands of data. So the way we combine that together into what we call our colour gun allows us to see different portions of the Earth a bit more clearly than others. So say, for example, we wanted to see urban environments, there's a certain combination that we put together for an urban environment, and that allows us to pick out an urban environment. Instead of seeing an image that you would expect to see in Google Maps, like a satellite image, or if you were looking outside out of a plane, if you were going on holiday somewhere, it changes the colours, and the colours are kind of a cyan, a blue, and then a red. And you can see the difference between urban areas and non-urban areas. But this Sentinel Playground processes that data for you, and it just presents it on a web page for you. So it's a great place just to get yourself started with getting familiar, looking at imagery, and looking at how you can change the imagery, and you can kind of adjust the outputs of what you want to see. So if you wanted to get started without actually having the daunting task of downloading the data and loading it into QGIS, you could go to that website and just have a play around, have a look at some different areas. You know, you could compare somewhere that's at home, somewhere in the UK, compare that over to somewhere maybe in Africa or China or America, and just to have a look at different environments, just to see how it affects your imagery.
I suppose building on that, though, someone asked about obviously resolution's key. So, and I kind of, this is a loaded, I've changed the question a little bit because it's a loaded question that I fancy setting you up with, and I think it's quite an interesting thing. What's a good resolution, and what can be done with different types of resolution, I suppose, different resolution of images?
So, I mean, a good resolution is something where we can see all the fine details. And if we think about it, if we moved away from necessarily Earth observation, where we think about satellite imagery, and we start to think about aerial imagery and drones, we can now get down to centimetre scale. So we can pick out, you know, really, really fine details. However, if we're using satellite imagery, the availability of the information is a little bit coarser. But what I would say, even in the 10, 15 years that I've been using satellite data, the resolution has really improved. So I started off when I was doing my undergraduate degree, and we were looking at around 30-meter resolution, mostly Landsat data. But the Sentinel data series, so European Space Agency Sentinel, they've now got their imagery is available in 10-meter resolution. And that data, depending on where you are on the Earth, because of the Earth's orbit, that's a little bit of a physics there. The wall hanging behind me is a good example of that. But we can image the Earth's surface every 3 to 6 days, depending on where we are. We get 10 meters of resolution. Now, there is new satellites that are coming about that allow us to see that even higher. So we're getting down now to 3 meters of resolution, but they are more restricted in their availability. So they're not necessarily freely available. You can apply to get them access to them for free, but it's mostly for research rather than for anything that's commercial. But you guys won't be thinking commercially at the moment anyway. Well, some of you might, but most of you probably aren't. What we generally say, though, is what the resolution is. So whatever the resolution of the pixel is, we are looking at having whatever feature we want to be picking out 3 times the size of that. So if we're having a 10-meter pixel resolution, we want something, say a building, to be at least 30 by 30 meters. And that's something called the minimum mapping unit. And the reason that is because obviously, if we've got a pixel, so a square of imagery that's 10 meters by 10 meters, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to look directly at that house that you want. You might have half of the pixel on one side of the house and half of another pixel on the other side of the house, and you're not being able to pick it up. So you want 3 times that size to make sure that you're picking up that feature. So obviously that does restrict how much you can do with the resolution of the data you can see.
I think, yeah, I mean, certainly from what I use as well, you know, you talk about the extremely fine stuff. You know, from what I do in terms of the flood kind of modeling side of things, you need to have that really micro scale, so you can see kind of where water goes. Well, I said it was a bit of a loaded question. It was a really good one that came in, so I thought I had to throw it out to you.
Volcanoes tend to be a bit bigger, and when they're very hot, they do what we call bleed into the other pixels, so we can pick up the heat from them, so we can get away with a bit of a coarser resolution.
Yeah, we do both come in it from a bit of a different resolution, don't we? Both.
I look at the globe, and you look at very tiny sites.
I look at how individual bits of vegetation can influence. But no, that's really interesting. It's, like I say, I think the kind of next bit really is again going back to that NEA and what people can do with this, because there are so many applications. Are there any others that you can think of that you didn't quite discuss in the Q&A, or any other kind of applications that you can think of as well?
Well, I mean, obviously I've focused for natural disasters, but the things that we can think about is change within our environment. So when I say change within our environment, that can span right through from the kind of anthropogenic environment, so cities and towns and urbanization and urban expansion, right through to perhaps more physical features such as changes in ecosystems, biodiversity loss, deforestation, for example. So there is a really vast array of what you can do with that data. The purpose is the beauty of it is that we can have a look at over time. So we can look between images, whether that's a week apart, whether that's years apart, but we can see how change is occurring in our environment. And that becomes really important. So as examples, projects that we do with students are getting them to look at things that, is there a relationship between green space in a city or a town and the deprivation that's affecting that city or town? Previously, we've looked at rates of urbanization. So we've taken a city in China, for example, and we've said, how quickly has that city expanded? How quickly has it doubled in size? What was the use of the land beforehand? What is it now? Has it changed from maybe being agriculture to becoming more urbanized environments? But then in another session, we go and we look at deforestation in the Amazon, for example, and how much of that land is being cleared, and what the purpose of that clearance is for. So you do really have a kind of a vast array of what you can do with Earth observation data. But I think personally, what you want to look at is that change over time. So something I've had students look at in previous years is for natural hazards was what's the impact of the tsunami in 2011 on farming in Japan. We've had students looking at the rate of loss of habitats for elephants in Africa, and whether that actually affects the movement and the population of elephants in Africa. Right through to, I've even had one student that looked at glacial melt in the Himalayas to see if we had what we call sudden flood events as a result of glacial melt, and how quickly that glacier was receding. And perhaps that's a really good example. We see in the news, I think there was one maybe today or yesterday even, that there was a glacier, and the change in the rate of change in the melting of the glacier in Antarctica. And all of that information, yes, they do go onto the ground and they go down to Antarctica to collect that information, but the majority of that information is through satellite measurements, measuring that change over multiple years, over months, and seeing if we can pick out key stages of changes in perhaps a kind of glacial melt, and obviously when we've seen with ice sheets, the break off of ice sheets and then how they move.
Yeah, I think the application is so far and wide, and it's the reason why we embed it throughout our degree. Bringing it back to what we do, it's in all three of our degrees, we do try and integrate it throughout at various points. Sorry, I've got something going right outside my room. I don't know how loud it's got. There appears to be a road sweeper straight outside. The joys of doing live recording. So we'll come back to that point actually, because I kind of want to finish on that point about the degree itself. But going back to hazards then, are there ways that the public can get involved in such projects, kind of after, in the aftermath of a project, kind of citizen science-based stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, there is a lot of, well, in one of the examples we talked about, I talked about there are kind of examples where we've seen not just with Earth observation, so satellite data, but the use of geographical information, so GPS data, but there's increasing use of that in the aftermath of hazards. We've seen it for people that are on the ground reporting where they need support and where they need help. We've seen it for examples where we need to know where the damage is. So in 2018, there was an earthquake in Palu that resulted in a tsunami and also in liquefaction. And as a result of that, ports were damaged, the airport was damaged, and one of the main roads into the city was damaged. And that was able to be detected through remote sensing, but also through reports. Now, there's something that we called crowdsourcing, which is basically using the power of people and using the power of the internet to basically do a job a little bit quicker. So rather than one person trying to analyze a whole satellite imagery or multiple pieces of satellite imagery, it's divided up into smaller squares, and those smaller squares are given out to multiple people, and they're asked to all do the same thing, but they're just doing it for a smaller area. That then allows people to actually afford a bit more attention to detail, so look at the image in a little bit more detail, but it also allows us to cover an area a lot quicker. So we've got examples not just for natural hazards, but where this has been used in the past. One of the examples I always refer back to with my students when we start off on this module for the first time is that we had, there was an example of a gentleman that had gone flying, a solo flight in America, and he had crashed, and they couldn't find him. They didn't know where he was, and the GPS wasn't working. So they downloaded satellite imagery for the region where they thought he had crashed, and used crowdsourcing through the internet to actually get people to look at the different pixels or the different segments of that image, and they were able to identify a potential crash site based on the fact that there was damaged vegetation or damaged trees, and they were able to get to him and recover him and rescue him a lot quicker. Now, given obviously the kind of the geography of the environment, it's very cold, you're remote, you've not got water, you've not got food, obviously that could have taken a number of weeks to do on the ground, and obviously we might not have been able to get to that man as quickly, whereas being able to do it through crowdsourcing, they were able to do that. And there are apps even on your phone now that allows you to do that, so you don't even need to do it on a computer. There's an app called MapSwipe that you can download onto your phone, and then it will tell you what the current projects are that are active in MapSwipe at the moment, and you can sign up, click onto them, and then say, for example, once a day you can work your way through an image and analyze it for what they're asking you to do. And even taking it back right into the UK, something that we've just had a publication for this in the last week is public rights of way, so public footpaths in the UK, and all public footpaths have to be registered by 2026 because otherwise they'll be lost. But again, the Rambler Society have sent out maps and historic maps of public footpaths to people, volunteers that have signed up throughout the UK, that have been basically been able to say, this path here hasn't been recorded. It's not recorded in current records. And what we've been able to do, and I can't remember the exact figure, but it's 49 something. I want to say 49,000 kilometres, but that seems very high at this moment in time. But it's 49 something that are routes at risk across England because they're not recorded. And that, again, that's been all done through volunteering and through crowdsourcing by people looking at the images for their local area, for their local town or village, and saying, oh, well, that's not on that map here, today's map, but it was on the map from 1940 or 1920, for example.
Perfect. So I think, I mean, like I said, there are so many ways that people can kind of engage with this. And I mean, as I've already kind of said, that we kind of do embed it throughout our degree for exactly that reason. That's all three of our geography degrees, our BA geography, BSc geography, and our BSc geography natural hazards degrees. They all have GIS, running through them, sometimes in different modules, bringing it in, but every kind of student on all of the three degrees will get exposed to and get some skills of it, because we know how employable it is as well. So I was going to just to kind of round off. Do you want to? I kind of just wanted to get your thoughts on what do people that do this kind of go on to do? What do they often go in terms of their jobs? What are their routes afterwards, after they've done their degree?
I mean, they are so vast. Perhaps I would be a good example of how vast the discipline is. So as part of my PhD, I went and I lived in Hawaii, and I did part of my PhD research in Hawaii, and it was focusing on volcanoes, as I've said previously. But when I came back, I went and I worked in industry for 2 years. I had two different jobs. My first job was actually working in local government. And within the local government, we were actually using geospatial information to better understand changes in that county, so in that local area. And that went right through from factors such as people's routes to work and travel to work. So where do they live? Where do they work? How do they get to work? Right through to health, so health data, perceived kind of mental health as well as perceived physical health, quality of life. So very, very human or kind of social aspects of data, but mapping it and understanding trends of, can we see particular clusters, right through into something that I remember one of the projects I worked on was looking at projecting school intake numbers and where we needed more places in schools in the coming years. So therefore, where should we place that school in the future? My second example, my second role was actually in what I call an environmental consultancy, and that was working in agriculture, based around agriculture in terms of looking at productivity of crops. How can we improve the productivity of crops? And also, how can we detect issues that might affect the productivity of crops, whether that's disease or something called fall over of crops, right through to things like water. So there was an example in York one year where we had quite bad flooding, but obviously Craig's interested in the flood event himself, but what we were looking at was the persistence of that flood water after, and how that affected the land, how it was waterlogged, and how obviously it affected crops. But we've had students go and work for the Environment Agency. Even I've seen job advertisements for the Ministry of Defence, central government, as well as kind of town planning, local government jobs, right through to charities as well. So working with charities such as Oxfam. I have a friend who I've worked with previously. She's a colleague and a friend, but has worked in a charity for Africa and worldwide. How we look at obviously the impact of climate change and agriculture in Africa. So really, as long as you've got the skill, I think that's the important thing. And what I think is important to note as well is that in probably the last 5 years, the government have actually increased their focus on trying to increase the uptake of the use of geospatial information, so Earth observation and GPS type spatial data, more so in the UK. And they have now formed, I say now, it's a good couple of years ago now, but they formed something called the Geospatial Commission, which actually is trying to upskill, but also increase the use of, or increase the number of people that we have trained in geospatial information and information processing. So they've got apprenticeships, as well as a kind of a government kind of initiative to increase that use right across the industry. And then the final one is something as simple as going into your local Tesco or Sainsbury's. We're not going to be selective here, but you know, what's on your shelf and what is being marketed to you? How is it being marketed to you? What price is it? And that all comes down to planning as well. So that is basically kind of shopping habits and looking at the demographic of that area. So, you know, what's in this area, what's the demographic, how old are people, what's their general income, what's their consumer behaviour, what are they likely to buy, what are they less likely to buy. So it comes even down, and there are jobs for this both in Sainsbury's and Tesco that I've seen advertised, and I've known students have actually applied for them, is just location planning roles, spatial planning roles, in terms of just looking at consumer behaviour, mapping that spatially, and then basically targeting what produce is put into that market, and what produce you see as you walk into Sainsbury's, for example, and that you're going to be more likely to buy.
Yeah, and I think the thing to remember as well is that we don't, you know, this doesn't require a deep knowledge of coding and programming before you try and do this stuff. This is open source software that is, you know, yeah, it takes a bit of practice, as Charlie said earlier, but this doesn't require, you know, detailed computational scientists to begin with. You know, this software can all be used and can all be engaged. And I think the more people we can get trying, basically having a play with it, the better, to be honest. So hopefully that's what this webinar is really kind of shown you. It's shown you kind of the very kind of functional how it can be used in the webinar. But this Q&A was all about, I wanted to tease out some of those things that can be really done. So thank you so much, Charlie. I really appreciate you taking your time there.
I think as well as if we've got any teachers that are obviously listening to this, watching this back, and if you want to use it and you want to use it in a class, or you want to use it as an example with your students, and you're not sure where to get started and you're not sure, you know, how to do it, get in touch as well, because that's the other thing that we can do is we can point you in the right direction. We've got resources. We've even had, you know, people come in, schools come in previously, and we've run kind of GIS taster sessions for those groups of students with the teacher as well. So that's another thing to note is if you want to get started and you want to get your students involved, but you're not sure where to start, get in touch and we can help you with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot of focus. The tweets we tend to put out about the wave flume tend to get lots and lots of interest, but actually some of this stuff is probably, you know, in some ways just as useful, if not more useful for students going forward, because it's something they can really, I think, do as a career. You know, that so many of our students use it. So thank you very much. Just a note to those that are watching, thank you. So thank you for taking your time all to watch both videos. Obviously, we've got all of our past videos up. So Charlie did a previous one in the last webinar series that is still available to watch. Have a look at that. There's, I think, 14 or 15 webinars there. There's also a whole series of videos that myself, Charlie, Jade and John all did over the summer, looking at some of our facilities. So please have a look at those. And also videos that Charlie, myself and Jade did with students. There's a whole host of them on YouTube, so have a look. But yeah, if you've got any questions, send us an email. Have a look at us on, keep an eye on what we're doing over Twitter and Instagram. I dare say it might go a little bit quiet for the next few weeks. We still will be around, but it may go a little bit quiet over the Christmas break, but we will still be putting stuff out, and we'll try and, you know, answer what you can. We've got an open day coming up as well. Off the top of my head,
15th of January. Yeah,
15th of January. So the sign-up details will be on our social media pages, but also if you go onto the university's website, you should be able to find it there, sign up, and it'd be great to come down and see you and see us in a proper dimension as opposed to just online. So if you can, please do. But yeah, I just want to thank you once again, Charlie, for taking your time to put everything together. I really appreciate it. I'm pretty sure it's been excellently received and really useful for people. So thank you again.
I thank you, Craig, for arranging them, because we've had a good couple now.
Yeah, good fun. So yeah, I think we'll sign it off there. But yeah, send Charlie an email or contact me if you've got any other questions. So thank you ever so much, and I'll see you later.
Thank you.